Okay, so starting our conversations for today, our topic for this month's Coffee with the Copper is a lot of different topics kind of put together. It'll be on advocacy and how you advocate for your residents, on advisors and what the student-advisor relationship looks like, and then lastly on FLSA, which is, I always forget the name and everyone knows this, but it's Free Labor Something Act, for forced labor, fun labor, fair labor, fair labor, something with an S Act. I'm waiting on Standards Act. There it is. The Fair Labor Standards Act. So we'll be having conversations on that as well. First, what I would like to do is introduce Sarah Amberson. She is the Regional NRHH Advisor, and she's going to talk to you all a little bit about the student-advisor relationship, and from her experiences being an advisor, now being a regional advisor, what that relationship really kind of looks like. And it's different for everyone, but kind of navigating for yourself what that relationship looks like for you with your advisor. And then also give a little background on FLSA and what that means, because I know a lot of people are still kind of like, what is FLSA? I don't really even know what that means. So Sarah, I will hand it over to you.
All right. So to get started, I want to emphasize what Connor already said about the advisor and exec relationship being unique and different in every aspect. From person to person. It's not going to be the same for every exec on an individual board, and every advisor is going to be very different. So I think the most important place to start with any advisor-student relationship is to have clear expectations. One of my favorite cliches that I like to say is that unspoken expectations always go unmet. So if you don't say what you expect from someone, then they can't act on it. And that's true for advisors. Advisors are professional staff members, sometimes are graduate assistants, but they're people that have been in your shoes, maybe not through RHA or NRHH, but they've been students, student leaders, and ultimately advisors want you to be successful. And they want you to be successful in your role in RHA and in RHH. But you obviously have to work together with that. So I kind of just wrote up a few things about, like, if you have a conflict, how to talk to your advisor. But honestly, I think that I would hope that at this point in the semester, although this is a time where a lot of conflicts do come up just from close working relationships, I hope you've already addressed how you would like to speak with one another if a conflict does arise, because it's going to be easier if you've already talked about it in the beginning of the semester. But obviously, advisors are there to serve as a support and a resource. And every advisor is going to be very different. And I think that sometimes we expect, I don't know if you've ever had an advisor, how many have had an advisor change from one year to the next, or from one semester to the next, right? Never. I'm looking at you, TD. But you know that every person is different, and I think sometimes we can be a little bit unfair in our expectations of advisors, in that they are all going to be the same, and they're going to have the same knowledge or the same experiences to give. But honestly, they all have your best interests, and so that's a good place to start. Is to start knowing that. By giving them the benefit of the doubt that they want you to be successful and they care about you professionally and personally. So that's kind of the spiel. Now, if you do have a conflict with your advisor, that's okay. You know, sometimes when we are working and we're in NCUR in general, we're all very passionate people. And so sometimes those passions can collide, and you may be wanting to do something and not feeling like you're getting that support. You might feel like your advisor doesn't understand what it is that you want. But what I found in my experience is that there's often a issue of communication. And whether that has been clear and clearly stated. So does everyone have one-on-ones with their advisors? I saw most shakings of heads. So if you have one-on-ones with your advisor, that's a perfect opportunity for you to meet with them and talk about these things. And don't feel like because you're the student that you can't bring up something that you're not happy about. I hope that at each opportunity that you have with your advisor, that you're saying kind of where you're at as a student leader in the position and where you're at personally, and that includes anything that you have in conflict. And so be honest, but be fair. No matter what the conflict is, y'all are going to be able to work out the conflict together. And I think that a lot of times we can get a little bit blindsided by our own personal passions. So the best thing that I can think of, a conflict that might come up right now, would be if you are planning for the next semester or planning for different things that you want to do coming up in the spring, and you're getting a little bit of hesitation from your advisor. The reason that I've ever given my board or students that I've advised hesitation on a project or a program is because I want to make sure that it's all the way thought through. And I want to make sure that we're on the same page and that it's something that we're going to be able to do and do well. So indicating that in the planning process and making sure that you're showing, your advisor that, yeah, I've got this all the way thought out, is going to be helpful. But if you feel that way, and if you feel like you're not getting that support that you need, say something, and say something early. Don't let it fester as you start to plan anything, and then all of a sudden you're really upset, because that's not going to help anyone. So those are, I didn't really come up with like any tips necessarily. Communicate often and effectively. Like for me, sometimes whenever I have any sort of conflict, it's easier for me to write down my thoughts before I meet with the person. I do that with almost anyone now. I just want to make sure that I'm going to be eloquent in what I say. I don't want to be thinking up of things while I'm already in the moment. So I make sure that I write everything down before I'm in the moment, and it's something I can reference. And usually after I've written it down, I don't need to reference it. So that's always nice. But it's there if you need to. And so that's what I would suggest in terms of any sort of conflict that you may have with your advisor. Does anyone have any specific questions about just addressing those sort of situations that might come up? And I'd also, I know I saw, go ahead, Molly.
Sorry, I couldn't get there fast enough. I have a question. Like, how do you go about, like, if you don't feel like your advisor is like there enough for you, or like does enough? Like, I don't know. How do you go about that?
My advice in that would be, first think back. If you didn't create expectations for one another and for what you wanted your advisor to be involved in the beginning, it's never too late to have those conversations. And I always think that if you're going to create expectations, that you need to reevaluate them, because what's working for you in September may not be what's working for you in December. And that is often the case. And I think that's true not just for individual advisor-student leader relationships, but the whole organization. That's why we have, different retreats and planning meetings and things like that, where we can kind of regroup and start fresh. So be honest, tell your advisor, like, hey, this is something that I've noticed. And make sure that it's coming from the things that they are doing or not doing, and not them personally. Guess what? Advisors have feelings too. And you want to make sure that when you're addressing these things, that it doesn't ever become a personal, conflict or confrontation. And it's not about them as a person, but about how they are supporting you. And so think about how that is. And in my experience, and tell me if this is true for you, your advisor probably has a job description in your constitution, or there's some, it's somewhere. And so take a look and see, what are those things? Are they meeting those requirements? Because that's what's laid out, right? So whatever, because a lot of times what's laid out is one thing, but then what we expect is something else. And I think that's where sometimes the conflict comes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. If no one has any other questions, Connor, let me know if I'm good to talk about FLSA, kind of go over that. Okay. So FLSA, I found a handy dandy link I'm going to post in the chat so that everyone can look at that in their own time. This is just a guidance on how FLSA affected higher education in general. So higher education is a unique beast, and so there was a lot of discussion about how this was going to affect institutions, and then even furthermore, residential life, housing, very unique situations that aren't like any other jobs. So let me back up a little bit. FLSA was a law that was enacted to raise the minimum salary requirement for all exempt employees. So the salary requirement was something around $23,000, something really low. And it had been that way for a long time. And it hadn't been raised in years. So a law was passed to raise it to around 47,000. I'm just giving general numbers. That's around about. That was a huge jump. Going from 23 to 47,000 meant that it affected a lot of people that were in that in between. Just so happens a lot of your professional staff members fell in that in between. And so how was the exempt law going to affect them? So we, as exempt employees, that means that you're exempt from being granted overtime pay or overtime comp time, so compensatory time, which would all be 1.5 times your normal rate. If you are a non-exempt employee, that means that you must be compensated for over 40 hours a week by comp time or overtime pay. Sounds great, right? And it is. It's not a bad piece of legislation. It is to be fair, right? Fair labor. But in higher education, we've been operating a certain way for a long time, where a lot of our professional staff members have worked over 40 hours and not been compensated for it. It's been part of the job. And so it was going to change the way that we worked, no matter what each school did. But each school, it was up to them to decide what they were going to do and how they were going to have FLSA impact their staff members. So they got to decide which employees were going to be raised to the exempt status, which meant their salary would potentially increase, or which employees would stay at non-exempt. If they had their employees stay at non-exempt, they had to start thinking about how are we going to afford to compensate them for comp time, overtime, what are their work schedules going to look like, on calls, which are very unique to housing residential life. So each school has decided, all right, I mean, it's coming up on December 1st that it goes into effect, and each school pretty much has decided whether employees are going to be exempt or non-exempt moving forward. What they haven't all decided is what that's going to change. Some have very clear-cut decisions that, for example, their hall director level staff will be in the office from 10 to 5 and have extra, 10 hours flex time where they can take care of on-calls and take care of staff meetings, programs at night, and all of that, so that they don't have to pay overtime or comp time. Some schools have raised their hall director level staff to exempt, which means they got a significant pay increase, as well as their school's not going to have to worry about paying comp or overtime. I know our advisors are different across the region. So we have advisors that are graduate students, graduate assistants. We have advisors that are at the hall director level, some that are at a coordinator level, and some that are even at the assistant director level. No matter what level, those staff members are going to be exempt or non-exempt now. So what that could affect is what they're in their job description asked to do after hours. For example, at UTD, our non-exempt employees are going to have to submit their work schedules the week before to get approval for any after-hour time. If we have to do comp time or anything like that, it would have to be approved ahead of time. So that will change. It could change, what a coordinator is allowed to be at if it's not approved. Of course, we want to work with them, but it's something that we're all trying to get used to of what this is going to mean. I know another thing that we've talked a lot about, not just at my school, but across the region, is how it could affect conference advising. So advising a delegation. Because as you all know, conferences are long and take a lot of hours, and your advisors are generally right there with you. They're up until 1 a.m. They're driving you to the conference, driving you to the hotel and back or whatever. So they're with you during that entire time. So it is up to the institution to determine what counts as working hours during that conference and how that will be compensated. Some institutions have determined that means that they won't send non-exempt employees to conferences. So that means that they might be sending more assistant director level and above type staff to conferences to advise those delegations, because those staff members are not required to be paid comp time or overtime pay. Some schools have decided to send more graduate student level, because although their hours are also different, you can send maybe more of them than we have non-exempt full-time staff. So each school has decided what their staff members are going to be, hopefully by now. But that doesn't mean that they figured out all of the pieces to the puzzle about how it's going to affect conferences, how it's going to affect after-hour programming, how it's going to affect our really busy months like August and April, any of those. And so your advisor specifically and your institution may not have all the answers. And so what I would really suggest in this time is to be flexible and be flexible with your advisor as they figure it out, as their supervisor figures it out, because it is going to be new, and it's going to be a little bit of a culture shift for higher ed institutions as we navigate. And it might sound weird as we navigate compensating our employees, but but we want to make sure that we are following the law, because it's something that you can be fined if you do not follow. And so it's really important. And yeah, so those are the things I can imagine that it might affect for each individual RHA. And it may affect other things just in your, I know I was looking at a Facebook post of Res Life professionals across the country. And earlier I saw one institution had made their like hall director level positions 10-month contracts. So they would no longer be around in the summer. That is just one way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways that people can figure out this piece of legislation. So the other thing, yes, Jenny, let me know, one thing that could potentially be affected is how your advisor is actually allowed to communicate with you after hours. So for example, all of our non-exempt employees are being asked to not have email on their phones because it's too easy to check when it's on your phone. So we've told the non-exempt employees that they are not allowed to have their email and respond to it after hours, unless they're on call. So that could include GroupMe. That could include, just picking up the phone. So that's going to be something that you need to ask your advisor. They may not know right now, and I wouldn't want you to go back to your advisor upset and worried about how your communication is going to be affected. But they do have to figure out how to follow this new law. So that's one way that your relationship could be affected. But hopefully, I hope that each institution has thought about these different things. But I know there are going to be things that come up where we have to be flexible and figure it out as it comes. All right, I'm going to yield to questions. Jenny, I also want to give you an opportunity and any other advisors that may be here. If you have something that I didn't mention, this would be a great time to mention it too.
Not really much to mention. Different than that, I know at A&M we got lucky in the fact that I'm obsessed with RHA, and so I got it back full time. FLSA is a win for me because we had to take it away from our community directors, so that lucked out. But we do still have lots of other student organizations within our department, and those did get farmed out to other higher level people or exempt hall director status, those are the ones that have been around for a really long time. Big thing that I think a lot of people are going to struggle with is that whole communication piece after hours. As Sarah mentioned, this field we grow up we're not in it for the money, and there's no such thing as an 8-to-5 job, and we don't punch a time clock. Well, now they're all having to punch a time clock almost, and so it's a very big shift in mentality, in our standards and what we do. And so just ask that you have patience with your advisor and be willing to have those conversations. And if you haven't started having those conversations, start having those conversations of how that's going to look, because it's definitely going to be very, very different for each individual school. We are trying to steer away from comp time as much as possible. And And our hall directors are now focused back on their community councils, which is benefiting our campus community, which is really good. But it's definitely something that you're going to have to navigate and learn. And we've been practicing for 4 months. We started in September 1 practicing FLSA 40 hours a week. And it's definitely still a learning method, and we're trying to figure out the being on call and all of that. But hopefully you've got people that are as obsessed higher up with RHA as some of us older folks, because it likes to keep us young. So have a good time. And yes, I'm sorry, I'm playing fetch with my dogs.
Midwestern State.
Okay, so at Midwestern State, I'm a hall director and also the advisor for RHA. And so what we do is every Monday of the week, we set our community engagement hours. And so we have a few hours in the office. It depends on your availability, if you're an advisor, if you're not. If you're not an advisor, typically you'll spend more time in the office. However, since I am the advisor for RHA, I take about a few hours out of 1 day a week so I can spend time with my RHA team, officers, etc. And so I just set that out. And then, of course, I set about 5 to 10 hours, especially if I'm on call for a weekend. I'll probably set aside 5 hours where I'm not in the office, just preparing for that. More than likely, I'll be called for more than just 5 hours over the weekend. For other advisors who are hall directors who know what I'm talking about. So it's definitely a culture change, but it's a good thing and a bad thing, the whole FLSA thing. Trying to be more optimistic. I believe everyone's trying to be more optimistic than pessimistic, but it's great to set some time. And I was just telling Rachel, it's all about just planning and time management, how you set that aside. And this, in a sense, gives a perfect opportunity for advisors who maybe do not have that skill set yet. It gives them that opportunity to develop that skill of time management, planning, and whatnot.
That's something that I would also say is that you may see your advisors. I don't know how often each of you look to find your advisors in their offices, but you may see them in their offices less as they make up the time with their after hours commitments. Tyler Junior College.
Okay, so kind of going off of what they said. So if I wanted to, because I go and I look for my advisor a lot every day. I mean, I walk past her office every day to my dorm, so I just kind of like poke my head in to see if she has anything. But we have, what am I trying to ask? Like, okay, so if they're after hours, like they don't work after 5. So, but we have our meetings. What is that? How does that affect our meetings after hours? Like, do they count that into their hours, or? Yes. I'm so confused.
Yeah, it is confusing. I can try to, and it's going to be very individual to your institution and to what they've decided. So I can't say your advisor may be exempt, and it may not have any like impact on whether they're working after hours or not. But if they are non-exempt, yes, they are going to most likely be required by their institution to stay as close to 40 hours as possible. Otherwise, the institution has to give them comp time, which under the law, you're able to hold 240 hours. So I know most institutions don't want people taking 6-week vacations in the summer, because I'd be out of here. But so they're going to limit the opportunities to get the comp time. And the whole spirit of the law is the work-life balance that Jenny put in there, and to be compensated fairly. So, making sure that people aren't at work 80 hours a week, even if your job is live on. So yes, they may not be in their office as frequently. They may have some restrictions as to what after hours things they're allowed to go to. It may be, maybe they're not, they don't go to every general meeting or every program. It's going to depend on the institution and what has been determined sort of for them. But I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your advisor now and say, okay, so I've heard about FLSA. I don't know if you're exempt or non-exempt, but how is this going to impact you, and how is this going to impact your relationship with us? What can we expect to change? What can we expect to stay the same? Because ultimately your advisors are still there to support you, and they want you to be successful. So they're going to do their best to make sure that's what they're doing.
Thank you so much.
All right. If you have any other questions about FLSA, honestly, I think the best thing to do is just start the conversations with your advisors now, asking about where they're at with their planning process on how to address FLSA and how that's going to look for your advisors. The best thing to do is just to have that conversation, because it is so individual. If you do want to reach out to someone about more information, you can always reach out to myself. You can reach out to Sarah. You know my email. I can send you her email, but it's also on the website. If you need to get in contact with us, we're here to help, okay? So moving on, and Jenny, of course. Moving on to one of the other topics, we've definitely hit a lot of the questions that I've had for working with your advisor and all of those sorts of things, dealing with FLSA. So what I really want to touch on with our remaining time is having good conversation on advocating for your residents. So first question is, how do you advocate for your residents, and what are some advocacy initiatives that you have? And you can just type an X into the chat, and I'll call on you. UH.
So I think, can everyone hear me? Okay. I think one of the best ways that our RHA advocates for our students is that all 5 of our exec board members sit on campus-wide committees where we can serve as like the voice of the residents. So even on like SFAC or Student Fees Advisory Committee, residents are probably the student population that's most likely to take advantage of things that student fees pay for. And so we just want to make sure that we can really have a voice for our residents on those committees.
OSU.
Yeah, so very similar to what Houston said. We have the opportunity to sit on a lot of campus-wide committees as well. And then we just try to like we sent out a survey recently to on-campus residents, and during our General Assembly meetings, we really try to like see what residents want or see what concerns they have. And then as an exec team, we brainstorm ideas too that we think are good ideas, and then bring them back to like our representatives and see if the residents think they're good ideas as well.
Baylor.
Again, kind of similar to everybody else. We have people on our RHA who sit on campus-wide councils, and they'll discuss things like facilities, housing, dining halls, all that. And then if students want something that they want RHA to do, we can push that and bring it to campus living and learning as well, and that's a way we will make sure the students' voices are heard at the administration.
Texas A&M.
All right, so I guess I'm Connor's twin. Anyways, how do I advocate for the students? Well, at Texas A&M University, RHA President Brian McBride does a really great job with meeting with. I actually met with the president on Monday, and that went well. He's actually trying to advocate for the food quality at the university because we're going over a new contract just because we've had some other issues with Chartwells, and so we're talking about how to bring that up. And there's other issues that we've as a group, as student leaders, that we're also dealing with. But personally, how I advocate is just like everyone else that on a bunch of committees. I make sure that to get into like the VPSA's office, or the Vice President of Student Affairs office, Dr. Q does a great job with listening to students. I found out a different tactic as well. I talked to someone who's he's in the Vice President office. He oversees the basically Res Life's director, and I kind of like met with him and got to know him personally and kind of made that connections to see, because Res Life here is an auxiliary, which I'm sure is probably everywhere else too, that since we abide by different rules, it's kind of hard to pass things, and so you have to make sure you play Res Life's rules, and you also have to make sure you play the administration's rules. So I sit on a bunch of committees with the other big seven, and so there's different ways of advocating. And I think Molly mentioned that she sends out like an email like trying to find out concerns and stuff. I just did that too, actually a month ago, and we had some issues within a hall, like because one of the halls had core living on the first floor and was taken away from the amenities from the regular students or regular residents. And what we did for that is basically like told Res Life, like, hey, they don't have a TV in their TV lounge, didn't have ice machines and stuff like that, and vending machines, and all it took was just saying something and literally just got done literally 2 weeks later. So it's just simple things like that. And I talked really fast, I'm sorry. Connor's twin's just too awesome.
It's okay. I had my twin telepathy. I knew what you were going to say before you said it. Okay. I guess another thing on advocacy is, I guess, talking more generally for people who maybe don't focus as much on advocacy, for the people who are doing advocacy initiatives. One, how did you get started with advocacy initiatives? Why is advocating for residents an important part of what you do? And for people who aren't doing advocacy initiatives, what are some kind of small things that you can start to do to start advocating more and more for residents? Because I do know that it's really hard if you're doing programming and you're a governing unit and you're just trying to do everything. Throwing advocacy in the mix can be difficult. But how can someone who's, their organization does so many different things, how do you add advocacy into the mix? Houston.
Okay, so like two things. I think a small way to start is just by allowing your residents, like opening up and allowing your residents to have a space to bring issues to you, and then using your role on committees or whatever you're doing. Even if you don't sit on committees, I would guess that you're probably in contact with the administrators of housing. So just opening up space either at your meetings, at your general assemblies, for residents to come talk to you. And then like how to start advocacy initiatives. So at the University of Houston, and I'm pretty sure all of y'all probably do some sort of like widespread like survey, like EBI or Benchworks or anything like that. And so we look at those areas where residents in particular aren't like so happy. So if it's dining services or postal or whatever the case may be, and we invite those people in to come to our meetings to talk to them, to ask them maybe why they think things aren't going great. And then we allow them to speak at our general assemblies directly to residents and get their feedback directly.
OSU.
Yeah, so you asked like a lot of questions in that one question and had a lot of different answers. But I think one thing you said was like, why is it important that, you do it? And I think it is because like students, like you're supposed to represent residents on campus, and you do have these connections from sitting on committees and getting to know some administrators. And so like administrators can sit in an office and talk all day, but like they really don't know what student like really want sometimes. And, as representing the students and like as a student yourself, like coming and talking to them, it can like be like really great for both parties, because then like they know more about what students really want, and then your students get what they really want. So I think that's why it's important. And then a way to add kind of advocacy in, like you said, like doing a lot as an organization, what I found is like I started to delegate more. And so like we have like a hall outreach executive that is like specifically in charge of like, seeing what residents like needs or wants or concerns are. And so that has helped. And I've been reading a lot of like past bids and stuff too, and like committees, and like, I don't know, just like adding more people can help like delegate that responsibility. And then you can do more as an organization.
Thank you so much. Midwestern.
Okay, so since we are like a baby RHA, this is our first year actually seriously kind of being that kind of advocate for students and trying to figure our way around and figure out how we can do that the best we can possibly do. I know one specific example that we've done this year is we just built this brand new residence hall, and there were a lot of people complaining about the temperature range in the hall. They're saying it's really, really hot. And so we submitted a proposal. We did this huge poll thing online to get students to basically decide on a new temperature range for the building. And then we submitted that to housing to get that changed. So basically our big program on campus is UPB, and they do like most of the programming and stuff on campus. And so before this year, RHA had kind of been like a mini UPB, because all we did was really try to do programs and stuff and then just say, oh yeah, we represent the residence halls. And so this year we're trying to shift our focus from being, well, we're not just like a programming board, basically. We also are the advocate for students. So we've been telling our members, like if you specifically have a problem with your residence hall, this is a good place to have that open up. And if like your friends are having a problem, they can come into our meetings, and this is a good place for them to tell what their concerns are and that kind of thing. And so like Molly's idea with the hall outreach committee and hall outreach executives, it's a really good idea, because we're kind of struggling with keeping up with such a large group of people and having everybody file in their complaints at one time. So
Yeah, definitely. I really like the Hall Outreach Committee idea. You all know that I've definitely been supporting y'all and really challenging y'all to delegate more. So I think that in doing that, it gives your members of your organization something to really invest in being, representatives of their buildings or whatever on that committee. And then also it kind of lightens things up for you so that you can get more work done as well. University of Central Arkansas.
So at the end of every spring semester, we have a program called Wine and Cheese, where we have people from the residence hall and campus in general come and tell us what they want different about, what they want to change on campus. We've ended up getting like 2-ply toilet paper put on campus instead of 1-ply. We've increased our Wi-Fi because of what the residents said they wanted to change. And it's actually gone really well the past 2 years. So they have food, and then they get to talk about what they want to be different on campus.
Yeah, and I really like that because you actually make the changes that people suggest. The key with advocacy is if you're going to be an open ear and invite people to air their grievances, you can't just let that be the end point. You have to actually show them that you're listening to them, but also doing something about it, and not just letting them kind of vent about it and then nothing happens. So that's a very good point. West Texas?
So lately we've been trying to do like more advocacy because we haven't really in the past done as much. So like some of the things that we've done just recently is, I know someone had mentioned too a committee idea, and that's actually something we're planning on trying to do next semester, is actually get that going. And this semester, one of the things we're doing is we're going to put out a survey with visitation hours. We're going to let people give some feedback on that. And then we're actually going to, based on that, possibly update our visitation hours for next semester. And then another thing that we've kind of been doing is we've been working with the presidents directly at their hall councils to start like bringing up and actually like getting things done that like people want. Like we, for the president in my hall, like I was talking to him, and little stuff like they wanted new ping pong paddles, they want to see if they can get printers in the halls and things like that. So those things up and let people know that they can bring those things forward and stuff like that. So, yeah.
And that brings up another really good point as well with the surveys. While like once a year or once a semester, having general surveys that are just very broad and touch on lots of topics for residents to give feedback on is great. And if your school does something like EBCI or something so that students can give feedback on their housing experiences, utilizing that's wonderful. But a lot of times targeted surveys work even better for you. So if you sit down and as an exec board agree that like, we really want to make a change in this area, like visitation hours. A lot of residents are upset about visitation hours and we really want to make that change. Send out a specific survey on that. Send out the specific survey on the temperature of the halls, because that will give you more concrete information to present to your housing administration, which they're going to appreciate. And then also it will actually be something that you can really get done, like my point before, to show your residents that you're not just listening to them, you're actually, impacting or acting on what they said. So our duck crossing is starting in about 5 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and end. The only other questions I had were on the advisor relationship and FLSA. And I think everyone really had great conversations and discussions on that with Sarah. If you have any more thoughts or comments or questions about your advisor relationship, FLSA, all of those things, again, please feel free to reach out to myself, your advisors, Sarah, Jenny. If you have comments that you'd like to share with the group, we do have the group me, like feel free to continue the conversation in the group me. But unfortunately with the duck crossing, we will have to end now. So everyone, please go to the duck crossing. It's going to be great. And as far as Molly's question that she had in the group me earlier on how long your GAs last, we can either make that, like have that conversation in another chat, or I can send out another survey, and you can give how you handle your general assemblies, and I can send out that information. I'm working on the results from the compensation survey, so I will get that out to y'all soon. But yeah, however y'all want to handle that, I'll work, and we'll try to get a good conversation about how you handle your GAs. I'll be on for a little bit, but we are done. Everyone have a good night and have a good weekend, and I look forward to seeing y'all next time. Bye.